and welcome to a new episode of the Winning with Insights podcast. My name is Mike. I am the founder of GTM Diagnostics, a go to market research agency specialized in win loss analysis. Today, I have a very special guest. Today, I have Olivier with me. He is the co founder and CEO of Turf, the in app customer community platform for SaaS. Olivier, thank you so much for joining me today. Before we begin, can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Oliver. I am the CEO and co-founder at Turf. I have been the CEO and co-founder for about 2 years now. We are 2 years into our adventure with Turf and excited about where we are right now. And thank you for having me and Mike as well. I'm excited to record this podcast.
Yeah, same. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what actually got you to start with Turf?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, I started off with an SDR role at a workforce management app. And so that was kind of my introduction to SaaS applications, as well as sales and marketing and whatnot. And I started there together with my co-founder at Turf, Tim Pau. And from there on, we actually first launched our first sales and marketing agency specifically for software companies. Long story short, we were like, okay, what we're doing for this workforce management app right now, we can do for multiple companies and, obviously, hopefully have some financial gain there as well. And so that was the initial thought on starting that sales and marketing agency. So when my co-founder and I were still in high school, that's when we started that sales and marketing agency. And we signed on about 3 clients until we were like, okay, this takes a lot of time to do everything ourselves. And 3 clients is kind of the cap at where we are able to deliver this service. And so, that's how we started off. From there on, we actually got asked by one of our SaaS clients at the agency to build a community environment for them. And so that's how we got introduced to the whole community space and customer community space. And while we were building that, we experienced a lot of issues, and it basically was really hard for us to get our customer base to become active in their community environment. And so from there on out, I talked with like 100 community managers at SaaS companies, asking them how they are doing it and how they overcame certain bottlenecks and whatnot. And from there on out, we kind of learned how to overcome that low engagement barrier in those customer communities. And we were like, okay, we have a problem here that we've experienced ourselves. We know how to solve it. Let's turn this into a product and a platform. And that platform turned out to be Turf. And so, that's how we ended up building Turf. We started, like I said, about 2 years ago now. And it's exciting. It's nice. It's cool to run a startup, especially at this age right now. And I'm excited about where we are and what we're going to do.
Awesome. It's always cool that you start out in one direction and then somebody asks you something and then you kind of pivot.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, really like a smart way, like, hey, like we're experiencing like a certain problem. Let's figure out how other people solve this. And I'm always a big fan of doing the interviews.
For sure.
Who would have known that that would be something I would promote? And then you kind of like saw that there were like certain similarities in problems that the other community managers were trying to solve for as well, or maybe even had some solutions to this. So what would you basically define as the problem statement that you were trying to solve for?
Yeah. So we were trying to solve the problem of low engagement and activity in customer community environments of SaaS companies. And so just to give some additional context there, SaaS companies are building these customer community environments in the first place to support costs, increase customer engagement, and lower churn down the line with it. And to be able to reach those three goals, you need your customer base to be active in the community environment. And so the more active they are, the more it's going to benefit those three goals. And when we started off, we were in a position, and I guess also in a market where people knew, okay, there's this value to building this customer community, but it was impossible for them to make it perform good enough to have an impact on those three things in the scenario where they are even able to measure that. So it's also good to mention that there were a lot of scenarios where companies at the time were not able to measure the business impact of their community initiative. And you kind of ended up in this gray area where people were like, hey, these other big companies are doing it. It must have a value and we probably should do it as well. And so they start off building a community initiative, but then they are completely unaware and have no idea what the impact of it is on the company and all the organizational wide goals or metrics and whatnot. And so slowly became less and less and less of a priority because of that. And the reality is it does have a lot of value and impact, and you just need to be able to measure it and then be able to, optimize it and make sure it has as big of an impact as it can have. And so, long story short, we set out to solve the problem of low activity and low engagement in those customer community environments.
That makes good sense, especially when we're talking about like the total cost of support and the retention. I think those are like the very big like drivers.
Yeah.
Then like one of the questions that pops up in my mind, like, hey, this might not fit every business well, or it might fit certain types of SaaS companies better than others. So who would you say benefits the most out of like the solution that you've built, out of like who benefits the most by implementing Turf?
And the easy answer definitely is SaaS companies with a bigger customer base. So the bigger your customer base is, the easier it is to get your community off the ground. Why? That kind of speaks for itself, because you have more users that are going to be initially active in your community. And when you first start off building your community, there's always kind of this, cold start period where, you need content to attract people, but you need people to get content. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem. And we have some tricks for how you can overcome that, even with a smaller customer base. But overall, it is a lot easier to overcome that with a bigger customer base. And so, logically also the impact that it has is bigger for companies with bigger customer bases, because they are relatively also impacting more on the support cost and retention.
But when we're talking about like a big customer base, does that also equal like a big, because it doesn't have to mean that there's also like a big user base, for example.
Yeah.
So, are there differences there? Like, what would be like a very good like starting point for the community initiative when we're looking at like numbers in customers and numbers in users?
Yeah, good question. So the main differentiator, what we see as it being between user base and customer base, is that obviously you have free users that aren't paying. And there is also a big use case there, because companies say, hey, we spend money on a support team and whatnot. Users that are not paying, we don't want them to be able to create costs for our support team. And so sometimes they create a community for those users just so they have a line of support from each other, instead if they do not have a line of support from the company. And so that's a use case there as well. To answer your question, a user base of around 1,000 users is kind of the minimum there. That's really what we are aiming for. It is possible to have a smaller user base, but just to get it off the ground, it's a lot easier. And for us as a company, the business case and selling that business case, is easier if they have a significantly bigger user base that's above 1,000 users.
It makes sense, like a bigger base then it makes like getting it off the ground becomes a lot more easy. But when would you define it as big? So
Yeah,
like the
totally.
cutoff point, you would say like, hey, like a 1,000, that's like a good like starting point. Like just put like a number there.
And by the
And
way,
then
we have seen companies with a smaller user base do it, and they have used Turf for it as well. But it's kind of a balance between we think you should start interacting with your community as soon as possible. It's just when is that moment when you are really allowing them to connect with each other, and are you going to do that in this big open forum where if there are no interactions, it obviously also works against you because people are going to come in there and see, hey, there isn't much happening here. What, and that's always obviously also going to have a down the line effect. And so we always say, if you have a smaller user base than 1,000 users, do have some community activities in terms of like events, direct lines of communication for all the different use cases that there might be for communicating with your customers, right? So that can be product feedback, that can be announcements and whatnot. But do create a community environment where you allow everyone to enter at a point where you are confident that you are going to overcome that cold starting off period.
yeah. And would you then also say that this works better, for example, for businesses that sell to consumers or businesses that sell to like other businesses? And then you can even make like a separation because you said like the free tier, but not every business has something like a free
Correct.
tier. Some of them are always paid. Um, like are there certain types of business models and like certain types of customers that fit better for Turf than
Yeah,
others?
for sure. Good question. So B2B definitely fits best. Why? Because B2B software buyers are a lot more involved with the product that they're buying than B2C customers. And when a company purchases a software, they are going to have people that are going to use that software, probably on daily level. And they are really involved with what they're buying and they are aware of why they're buying it. And so they are trying to achieve the goals for which they bought the software in the first place. And so there's a level of involvement that comes with that. And that involvement has turned out to be a lot more than B2C buyers. And so yes, definitely. We prefer B2B software companies just because it's easier, to be honest. But that doesn't mean that it's not easy or doable for B2C companies. It isn't as well. There's just a deeper level of involvement with B2B SaaS than B2C SaaS. And yeah, and in that scenario, there are still B2B companies that have free trials, obviously, and whatnot. And for them, like I said, there are different use cases. They might want to have a line of support for their free users because they don't have access to direct support. But also, on the other hand, use cases where they want to allow their highest paying customers to connect with each other in private, exclusive groups and stuff like that. So within the framework of B2B and a user base, which is roughly above 1,000 users, that's kind of the sweet spot for us in terms of selling.
I can imagine that like you have like your ICP hopefully a little bit defined. There was this one thing that you mentioned, like they're probably using it like daily or on a very regular basis. Um, like for example, Google is what I use, like the Google Workspace. I'm a daily user, but to be honest, like I don't really feel the need to become part of, for example, their community because like they have a lot of very well written out documentation.
Yeah.
And like I don't really feel the need to connect with others because like I'm very well, like things are working for me. I'm good. Is there like a typical like use case? Maybe I don't know how to say this, but I can imagine that this would again like not fit every business
Yeah.
like the best. Is there like a specific like type of business where this works really well. For example, when it's like a very technical product, or when it's something that has like a lot of different use cases which people then can share, or like what do you see? What do you think?
Good example, because indeed, for example, Google is really broad, and you use it for all these different things. And for you, it's quite clear how to use it, and there's no real instant. Like, you do not identify necessarily as the same persona as another person that uses Google, right? So it's really broad. And so, to answer your question, this works really well for SaaS companies that really cater to a specific persona, and that persona then should be able to connect with each other about their similarities, about their correct characteristics, the day-to-day work life, and whatnot. And so, an example that I always use that works really well is, for example, a SaaS tool like Expandy. There is a really clear persona that uses Expandy, and there's a really clear goal and action that they're doing and using when using Expandy, which is automating sales outreach. And so, when you are automating sales outreach, there's a lot of value for those users to discuss with other people. For example, as you targeted this niche, what kind of messaging works here? Why not? Why yes? What are best practices in sales? What are best practices in cold outreach, etc. And that's an example that works really well. And overall, I would say, if there is a clear persona that's kind of similar, and obviously the bigger companies get, the more personas there will be involved down the line. But then it is a matter of making sure that you can still connect the right personas with each other, instead of throwing them into this one big group where there are all these different personas. So it really is kind of a matter of persona matching and being aware of what your customer base consists of and how you want certain personas to interact with each other, I would say. Yeah.
It's quite interesting. I haven't looked at it like this, like the persona matching based on like the identity. They can have like the different levels.
Yeah. And to be,
where they can share like different use cases and success stories, and like the way that they use it.
Yeah. The reality of it, though, is that customer communities do start off being very product and support focused, right? So if someone has a support question, that's the initial trigger for someone to go to the community. And so having the trigger there is good, but once they get there, the goal is for them to be exposed to this broader value of community, which is those interactions, and which is the value that they get from communicating with peers that are doing the same thing and are having basically the same persona as them. In our market, there is still also, I guess I would say, some debate about, product communities and support communities versus the real community feelings and the feeling of belonging that community should bring. The one basically facilitates the other. And the reality of it is that people initially come to the community to get support and get their questions answered. But once they're there, they should stick for the value that they are being exposed to with similar people that are experiencing similar things and going through the same day-to-day activities as them.
Yeah, something like a land and expand like strategy.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. That's really good. So I get where you're coming from. So we're trying to increase the activity and the engagement within our community. And we do this by making sure that, first of all, like there are enough people that can go into the community. We're going to make sure that the persona matching can take place on different levels, different use cases, sharing success stories. But like more often than not, the first trigger is to get them in via support. Like this is like a generalization, of course, but then once you have them in for support, you can basically expose them to the broader value of the community. So there are like different levels, I guess, on community use cases.
Correct.
I want to go, like we can go there a little bit later, but first I want to know like when or how do I know that a community is like a good solution for us to start implementing? Like you said it, of course, like, hey, you have like a certain amount of users, but then you already mentioned like the support costs and the retention numbers. Like, what are some of like the triggers that a B2B SaaS might experience where it's like smart to start thinking about a community?
Yeah, for sure. So, like you said, there are a few different angles here. I'll start off with the support angle, which is quite easy and simple to understand. In the support angle, it basically comes down to a support rep getting the same question, 5 times per day, for example. And so obviously most companies already have documentation and a knowledge base where that question is being answered. But the reality is customers still reach out to the chat support and direct support to answer a specific or to get a specific question answered. And that is happening. The same question is still being answered and asked a lot. And so support reps are like experiencing that and are like, hey, we can make it easier. Let's just open a community environment so they can ask a question there and get an answer from someone else that at that point probably has asked that question to support as well and knows the answer, for example. So for support, it's really scalability. It's scalability in terms of getting questions answered, which means that, instead of hiring a new support rep when your customer base increases, you can create a custom community environment, which basically is a way to infinitely scale your support mechanism as your customer base grows. Because every user that, becomes a new customer is also a new user that can potentially provide answers to other users. And so it's kind of this infinite scaling mechanism for your support. How should I say that? Your support module and mechanism. And so that's an initial trigger often from the product support side. Most of the times, however, it lies within customer success. And what happens with customer success is that they see our churn is too high. We are losing too many customers. And the reality is that every company is always focused on their churn, right? And your churn is never what you want it to be. And so customer success is continuously looking for ways to reduce that churn. And customer community is one of the things that comes up quite quickly when wanting to reduce churn. It's a initiative that makes sense. It's really easy to understand why a community can affect churn, besides all the data that we have on it, obviously. So for customer success, it is churn. And then we have one last use case, which is marketing. And communities also get used by the marketing department to bring in non-customers. So people that are falling within the target audience of that company. They are not a customer yet, but they have interest in the company and they can get value from interactions with their customer base. And so their customer base basically are peers of theirs. And so the value that they get from those interactions and those interactions, by the way, are not product related. So those are purely niche and activity, I would call it community of practice related. And so just to get back to the example of Expandly, I would explain it by saying those discussions would purely be about how to write the best messaging and, what niche you should use, what type of messaging and whatnot. And so that's how they lure in potential customers to their community environment. Those potential customers are then being exposed to the brand and also other product related stuff, such as discussions about the product, their roadmap, announcements about their product, which then makes it easier for them to convert. And so it is also really easy to measure, okay, someone that converted, was this person in the community before they converted, and then allocate that value to the community initiative. So you have those three pillars: support, success, and marketing.
Awesome. Alrighty. So if I'm going to play like the devil's advocate a little bit, like, okay, like we can bring support costs down because we can basically centralize our support function for certain types of support questions within the community. There are alternatives to this. For example, you have now all these very awesome AI chatbots, which you can basically upload your knowledge base into, and they can just chat with the bot, and they will provide the answer.
Yeah, correct.
What would be the added value of the community versus something like, for example, the AI chatbot?
the added value mainly comes from getting an answer from a user perspective. And so you're getting an answer from someone that had the same issue and was able to overcome it. And how that person answers your question is always going to be more helpful and in depth in terms of how you can actually solve it yourself than you would get it from a chatbot. Then from the chatbot point of view, obviously that depends on the quality of the content that it is trained on. And so the written content in their knowledge bases is not from a user perspective. And a lot of the time still, is quite abstract. And so we see that getting an answer from another user that had the same issue, solving their issue that they have at that time a lot quicker and a lot better. And so that's the real core. There are also other values in terms of having that done through a human interaction and the value that they get of like the community feeling around helping each other and getting that feeling to the brand. And there's a value to that as well. Indeed, purely question answer related, purely sport related. We value user answers more than answers from a chatbot. So answers from a user perspective, I should say.
It makes sense emotionally, socially.
Yeah.
My first thought is also like, it can also be like an escalation platform, basically. So the chat is trained on like technical know-how and knowledge. But then if the answer that you get isn't what you want, like the community can be there for this like user perspective, basically. So it could even go hand in hand with each other. Now that I'm thinking about this, but
for sure. And I also try to explain it sometimes in the all the different support cases that you have. Like you might have tier 1 support tickets, which really are questions about literally how do I do X, Y, Z in this product. That's the one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum are those questions about how I explained about Expandi, what type of messaging is good. So literally what you do with the product, right? Instead of what to do inside the product, what you do with the products. And there is a big gap in between and different questions that can, show up there. For the tier 1 support tickets are really about how do I do X, Y, Z? Yeah, a chatbot that is trained on correct content is always going to give a quicker answer. But there are different tiers of questions that
there are levels. Yeah, we're talking about the same. That's what I meant with like the escalation of
totally.
like support. Then also a use case, more like community of practice, as you called it. Then again, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So retention, churn. So you mentioned like, hey, the customer community often makes sense and it's easy to understand why. This would very much depend, I guess, on what the reasons are for churn. So what specific reasons for churn would a community like solve best?
Yeah. So from my experience, the most common reason for churn is someone not being able to achieve the goal for which they bought the SaaS application in the first place, right? That's why people churn most of the times at the end of the line. And so not reaching their goal can have multiple causes. 2 very likely causes are they don't know how to use the product. So they don't know how to interact with the product to be able to do it. Or and the other one is they do know how to interact with the product, but they don't know how to effectively use it best. So for example, in the Expandi use case, again, someone knows how to create a sequence, but they don't know how to create good messaging that works, cold outreach messaging. Those are the 2 pillars there. And if you, first of all, are able to properly onboard them and say, hey, this is how you use the product, and then also educate them on how they can create the best messaging for themselves in this Expandi example, that would be the core for retention, right? And so a community initiative comes into play for both of those pillars. It helps people with understanding the product, through those interactions, information, support, product related kind of questions. And it helps them with learning how to use their product then best for their use case.
Okay, that again, it makes sense. In turn, like there's a lot of different things that go into it when you're talking about like, hey, like this eventually trying to become successful with the using of the platform, and you have other users sharing their experiences with you, not just technically how to set it up, but then also in the way that you use it, like from the example, like the, how do you say that? The messaging in like a CRM example, for example, like, hey, this is like some automation within the pipeline that works really well for us. Or if you're using like a specific sales qualification framework, like Medic, like this is how we set it up in the custom fields, and this is how it works best for us. I can imagine that those types of questions being answered by other users can help with becoming more successful through a community. But then again, if the product, for example, is buggy and not working, like the community won't do much.
No.
So there are certain
Yeah.
things that, of
The
course,
community most of the times does have a function in, for example, bug reporting. Like in Turf, we have default bug reporting functionality in there. We have customer feedback and ideation board, and that's something that inherently isn't a community forum, but those are kind of modules that you want to centralize in your community. So all those different customer interactions, we always say you should centralize as many of your customer modules inside your community environment, just so that it becomes the one go-to place for your users, which then again increases activity and usage of all those modules because of it. So not only the forum, but also the other modules that you have centralized will increase in usage.
Cool. I like that. Again, like I think you need to take a very good look at like what are like some of the churn reasons that we've discovered, and then how can we use like something like a community platform in a smart way to support with those specific reasons.
Totally.
And then like it's a whole different story in how you can make sure that it's set up properly, that you're incentivizing people in the right way to share those stories, etc. But that's like down the line, that's more of an implementation thing, I guess. But that's for something where we can go into like later. For the marketing with the non-customers and having that as like a show of value to them, I can see how that will work. I think, for example, some very big companies have done this.
Yeah, correct.
Where they are very well known for like a specific topic or theme, and then basically create a community around that, and then their product just leads into this.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think it's good to mention about that. That's in that scenario, it is initially what lures the potential customer in, right? And that's considered marketing. But then when that customer is in, it is also what keeps that customer being a customer, which then qualifies as customer success multiple times. And so it's the same thing that facilitates both, essentially.
Yeah. So we've now talked about marketing, we've talked about support and customer success. More often than not, those are very different departments. So one is like customer success, marketing is marketing, support sometimes is like part of product, could be customer success, but then I'm very curious then if we go into like, how can we measure the impact of the community? Then first of all, like who should own the community, and like what metrics should you then measure?
Yeah. Good question. Who should own the community is kind of in our niche and age-old question in terms of like, and that's a question that we have to answer to potential customers a lot as well. And what we do is we say, we talked right now about all the different ways you can benefit it, right? Most times what happens is there's one of the departments that has an issue with one of those metrics that they are having, right? So it's either success with retention, it's either marketing with not getting enough new leads in the door, or it's bored with getting the same question over and over. Either one of those three departments then basically goes out and says, hey, we need to solve it. And one of them then comes down to community as a solution. And so that's the most likely way we are selling. But there are also scenarios where we really are kind of cold selling, I guess you would say. And there's a company that hasn't been a trigger yet, and we need to sell them on the use case. In that scenario, we always go the route of customer success. We obviously first try to identify what the bigger pain point is for which department and for which metric, but churn and retention does seem to be the main consistent one that has been easiest for us, at least, to sell on. And so what we do is we say, here's a community initiative. What it can do is it can facilitate discussions between your users. It can have a support use case. It can have that community of practice use case. And down the line, that is going to impact your churn metric. How do we then measure that? Basically, what we do is we always set up a CRM integration, and then we are able to compare the churn rates of customers that are a community member versus the churn rates of customers that are not a community member. That's high over how we do it. We do have deeper levels in terms of saying, hey, customers that are a community member and also posted once every month versus, customers that are a community member but has never posted. And so we can really dig deep on, and quantify each specific value of different customer actions in the community environment. But that's how we measure churn, the impact on churn, I should say. For support, what we do is we directly measure the number of support cases that have been deflected through activity in the community environment. So let's say someone created a post, we allocate a certain value to it. Someone has commented on a post, we allocate a certain value to it. People can also submit on a button and say, hey, this post has helped me. We basically have like a question at the bottom of each post page saying, did this post help you? With 3 smileys. That's data that we use to calculate that. But also we allocate values to visitors on the post page of a certain page. Like I said, comments, posts, etc. With that, we have basically a system in place that directly calculates the deflected support cases. And then we can directly display and calculate these support costs overall. And so for the community manager, that's really nice because they can literally go in the moderated dashboard and see the impact that their community environment has had over time. They can view it for the entire timeline for past year, month, whatever it may be. Anyways, for the community manager, it's really good because then they can also go out and show leadership and say, this is the value. You need to prioritize this more. This really is becoming the backbone of this company. We need more budget or we need whatever it may be.
Okay, cool. So basically you would say like, hey, like in most cases, like the most obvious one would be customer success, to own it in the beginning, at least. But the users, basically, your own users can eventually also become like product and marketing and maybe even sales if they want to like interact with like the non-customers or that are like in pipeline basically.
Yeah, totally.
But then it would be like more of like your top of funnel go to market. And then you basically measure engagements and you basically tier those engagements based on, is this like more of a community of practice engagement versus a support engagement? And then are they like the power users that sell their or share their stories and experiences versus people that are actually just looking and getting like value, extracting value from the knowledge that is being shared within the community? Are you also, because like most of the AI language models. They're all very popular right now.
Mhm.
And do you use something like this to, for example, tag specific use cases to see if there's like a commonality there? So, for example, product can do something with this, or even other departments.
Not yet. So we are not having a model run over that as of now, but we do, for example, also integrate with product management tools and say, hey, in the roadmap that it's already customer feedback ideation boards that are displayed in the community, people can interact with that, right? And those interaction data, we also send to the product management tool just to get an idea of like what type of user supports what type of feature request or what type of user is experiencing what type of, just to get more context around those things. Indeed, yeah, no, it's a really good point. You could also use AI and models to train on that, and then get a better insight, and also, I guess, and make forecasts on how different user segments might experience the product and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a very popular thing right now is, for example, like health scores
Yeah.
for customers. And I can imagine
NPS
that if like
scores.
certain types of yeah, but not like the health score, like how likely are they to retain or churn? And then you can basically extract information from the community based on types of support questions or types of interaction.
Yeah.
If you were to like, what has been your experience? Let me put it like this.
Mhm.
When you're looking at the data, do you see that like people that are looking versus people that are sharing? Like, what is, in your opinion, like more important when it comes to like your retention and stuff like this?
Sharing, 100% sharing. The reality is that sometimes up to 90% of the community members are lurkers. So they are just watching and
Yeah.
just watching the content that, the active users are creating and posting. Now, they obviously do get value from lurking. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, right? They're viewing the answers. They are getting answers to their questions, getting help from those community practice discussions that they're reading. But the most obvious value definitely comes from the people that are actually posting. They create the value for the lurkers, but they also create the value that they themselves are experiencing. Is really the core community feeling and the core community aspect for which you set out to build it. And so nurturing them is really important.
Yeah, I would basically classify them almost as your power
Yeah,
users.
your power users. Yeah,
But
definitely.
it's funny that you say this, but I believe that it's the same with most social media platforms, that you have like the 90-10 rule there, that 90% of people that are active on a social media platform, they don't post often or regularly, but 10% is, and that's basically who receives all the eyes and all the likes and all the views,
Yeah,
etc.
I guess on LinkedIn,
Um,
the 10% is mostly the people wanting to gain something from it. Yeah,
what do the active users, like the posters of a community, get? Like, how can you incentivize them? Like, what has been like some of the biggest successes that you've seen so far for incentivizing people to actively share their stories? Because in the beginning, we started with like, how can we increase community activity and engagement? And we've talked a lot about the problems it can solve and how you can identify if these problems are there. We've talked about like, hey, how can we actually measure these impacts? So we basically tie the engagement in the platform back to like the customer, and we can see that there's like a correlation there between like the churn and the amount of engagement, the types of engagements, etc. But then how do we make sure that people are going to be active? Because that is still for me a question
yeah,
mark.
for sure. I think to kind of close off that problem solution loop, I should quickly highlight how we are actually solving that, right? So I talked about the issues that they are
Mhm.
experiencing, the problem, and the problem that we solve. How we actually solve that low engagement issue for customer communities is we basically solve that SaaS users want to be active in a community environment of a SaaS company when they are using that tool in real time or when they have just used it. Those are the moments where they want to be active most. And so integrating your community inside your SaaS application has by far the biggest impact on activity engagement that we have seen so far for our customers. For SaaS companies, we always say integrate it in your application 100%. In that case, your user can just stay on the application, on your application, and basically be on the screen that they are experiencing the issue or have a question about, and open the community through the in-app widget, basically. That's one way. And then the other way is by allowing the company to centralize literally every customer-facing module that they have in the customer community environments. So really creating that one go-to customer hub by integrating your roadmap, your customer feedback ideation boards, your academy, your knowledge base, your help center, your events, whatever it may be, creating them one-stop customer hub is really key in increasing activity, not only on the forum, but also usage of all those other modules that I just listed. And that's basically...
that's what you meant by the modules.
Yeah, correct.
That's what you meant. Like the academy is a module, for example, the roadmap is a module. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's basically what how we're solving that. And yeah. And just to come back to your question, how do we then make sure how do we incentivize them basically to start posting, right? To start sharing. Yeah. And point one is a really easy one that we always say is, hey, do you have partners? Do you have affiliates that benefit from posting that environment and being exposed to your customers, right? Like partner of, for example, Salesforce has a lot of benefits from showing their face in that community and being exposed to customers because he gets deals out of that. So that's an easy win. Then you have your power users and as you mentioned, your power users, your really engaged users that are really involved with you, with the product, with the brand, are actively posting on the feedback boards and whatnot. Those users are passionate about your product and passionate about your brand. They want to share their experience, want to share their thoughts about your product. And so for them, how we would incentivize them is basically giving them more exposure. So those are people that want exposure and get kind of a validation from being able to share their knowledge, their value, and whatnot. And so you have a certain percentage that consists of that group. They have a group that just falls outside of that, and they need to be incentivized by other things, such as, for example, tying community activity to rewards. So you can use rewards to say, hey, you can get a discount on your subscription, you can get merch from the company, you can get all these other things. That's how they incentivize them. And by the way, for the power users that I mentioned before, there are also gamification systems in place, right? So you can award badges, you can share-based leaderboards. Those are all things that trigger those people that, want to get recognition and show the value that they can have on a customer base and a certain community. And then outside of that, you basically have the people that just want short-term gain, right? So an answer to their question, and they are looking for for help. And in the scenario of them not being able to reach out to support because they are not a paying user, that the way they can get an answer. Maybe they are thinking, hey, this is the way I can get an answer best in terms of getting it from a user perspective. They just post a question. And regardless of they have the intention of interacting with the community, they post a question and they want an answer. And that's basically the different categories of users and how they are incentivized to be active in the community.
So you first need to know, like, hey, what is the reason for them, or like what are they hoping to achieve? This could be for partners, for example, like getting in contact with potential people that they can help. Power users, you want to like basically showcase their expertise, put them on a pedestal, and like put some gamification there, because hopefully they are driven by this. You can reward them with merch, discounts, etc. But then so this is all internal. Like this is when they're like in your app. can imagine. But we've initially talked also about the marketing use case for non-customers. How does that work? Because there are certain like channels from a very well-known company that I'm part of. You could call it a community there. And it's very easy for an external person to join that. But then I'm not in their, how do you say that?
Application.
I'm not exposed to their application, etc. I'm in an external environment with other external people. How would you do this? Because like there's like a case to be made to say like, hey, instead of the community being in app, we can make it out of app, so it's more easy for non-customers to join. But then again, like in app, you've already mentioned, because it's in app, you are going to see higher activity and engagement from the people that are in there, because it makes most sense for them, because when they use it, they have the question and it's there basically. So how would you like compare this to an external like alternative?
Yeah, great question. So when I say in-app, what we do is we basically their external environment, right? That is on a separate tag, that is on a subdomain of their main domain. And we basically take that and put an in-app version on as well. And so they are running in parallel. And so whatever happens, the in-app version just reflects the main platform, right? And so that's how you trigger both. And so in that scenario, you can have the people that are coming more from the support end of the spectrum and success end of the spectrum through the in-app and increase activity that way. But then on the other end of the spectrum, the community of practice and those discussions and that value, you're getting through the main platform. And the main platform is also, that is being indexed in Google. And so that's for a lot of companies, the majority of their traffic. And so that's how non-customers find their community and find the value of those discussions in their community. And so it happens in parallel, and that's that's the answer.
That's smart. Yeah, that makes sense. Like there still would be a case to be made, for example, because the other platform that I talked about, like let's just call it like Slack. For me, it's relatively easy. I open Slack. We use it internally. It's how I communicate with my partners. And then I just have all these other workspaces that every now and then I can drop into and see what's happening.
Yeah.
So that would be basically makes it more easy for me to just snoop around a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if I have to go to the website, the domain, that's like an active step to get there.
Totally.
But then again, I could imagine that once you are in the external version of the in-app community, or if you want to call it like that, you are probably also more engaged already.
Yeah.
So you would identify, I guess, as a higher qualified lead, basically. So
good question as well, because the comparison to Slack is basically what my full-time job consists of right now. Actually, in my opinion. So the answer there is you have to look at how people come to your community environment. And so in SaaS customer communities, you have to look at the steps that each user has taken before they were in your community and hadn't done something there, right? And so for SaaS companies, 80% of the users that are active in the community are active there when they are coming from the application. Because the reality of it is the majority of them, 80%, are using and are active in the community because of those support and success use cases, right? And so the intent to be there is highest when they are in your application. And so the barrier to entry is a lot lower when they can do it inside the application versus on Slack. And that's basically number one. Number two is that on Slack, it is just a big chat box. And so what happens is if I have a support or success related question and I post it, you basically have a certain amount of time and a certain number of posts coming underneath it before it is out of view, and the likelihood of it getting answered goes down by like 50%. And so that's why customer communities for SaaS companies do not work on Slack. Absolutely do not work on Slack. And I feel like in our market, we are kind of in this transition where Slack is the obvious choice. You're for the exact same reason that you mentioned, right? You are hanging out in Slack. You can easily click to another workspace and whatnot. But the reality of that is there needs to be intent to do that. And that intent comes from activity and usage in the SaaS application. And that's kind of the argument.
I think again, if we go back to how do we measure the impact? Well, the basic thing is like now we're measuring this mainly on retention and cost of support, basically. So it makes most sense to start there. And once you have external people, the non-customers that do come in to get like more broader value, basically for the community of practice, as you've called it, they're probably already higher intent because they actually come to you. And that there are many different reasons why you shouldn't do this on Slack. Basically, history is one of them. Structure is one of them.
Oh,
Engage, like be actively engaged with.
yeah. So those are
is
exactly
another
the
one.
same 2 points that I mentioned. Like being able to generate that activity in the
Yeah.
first place is harder, but then measuring the impact of it is completely impossible. Like there are
Exactly.
third-party tools, but still, it's really hard. And yeah.
So let's say I'm convinced. I've identified there might be like we're increasing the cost of support. We're seeing a potential negative trend within our customer base when it comes to retention. Let's get started. Like, how would the process look like with Turf to actually set up a community that is going to increase the activity and engagement of our customers, leading into lower support costs and higher retention?
Basically, what we do is we start off by looking at what your goals are for this community in the first place. So why do you want to create it? Based off that, we then look at the tech aspect, which modules that I mentioned before should we integrate.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's success board related, you likely want to integrate your existing knowledge base, your help center, maybe even your direct support chat, whatnot. If it is more product related, you might want to integrate your product management tool and display customer feedback boards and whatnot. And so our team sets that environment up and make sure that it's technically completely ready to go. Once that's done, we get on an onboarding call and with most of the times a customer success manager, or if they already have a community manager, the community manager. In that call, we then basically go over everything and we onboard them with every functionality and every feature that needs to be explained. From there on out, that person gets access to the environment and can then, make the finalizations and perfections, change colors, do all the customizations, the branding, whatever is needed to get the environment set up and running. And from there on out, we basically go into this process of launching your communities. And at Turf, we have built a kind of a step-by-step launch guide. And depending on what level of customer it is, we give them the launch guide to go over it by themselves, or we do it with them, with their dedicated customer success manager, and basically guide them through every step. And that guide goes over the first things of how to get over that gold star problem of your community, and basically how to in your customer base, then how to promote it, how to then monitor it, how to then manage it, how to then measure the impact to reach them gets covered. It basically gives them the tools to get their community up and running, and then also ensure that it becomes a success, and then also obviously be able to what success means, right? Like know what the impact is and is going to be. And so that's basically the flow that we go through.
Awesome. Okay, so we start with the goals. We make sure that based on what you're trying to achieve, so the customer success person or the community manager is looking for like increased activity that's hopefully going to lead to like the higher retention and lower support costs. Based on this, we're going to make sure that the right modules are in place, that the content is in place, you've set up the environment, they get to review it, and then afterwards there's like this self-serve component to make sure that everything is how they would like it. You have the launch guide to make sure that they are successful, and it's either done with you or a do-it-yourself and or like done for you, like
Yeah,
flavors
correct,
basically,
correct.
and then like ongoing support from your end. How does that look like? Because you've already mentioned like, hey, well, like you need to know, of course, like you need to measure it, you need to like identify impact. Like, what is your role for helping out these people to become successful once they are actually using it?
Yeah. So our role and our job is just as we talked about before to make sure that our customers are successful with using Turf, right? So if they set out to reduce churn, and that's why they want to build a community, we are gonna guide them to get to a place where their community is impacting churn. And so what we do is along the way, we look at the different strategies that they are using, which in the beginning have all been, taught by us in our launching guide and whatnot, to generate that engagement. And so, for example, if we are seeing, hey, we are getting some activity, but not enough, and it's not impacting churn enough, our always have access to our customer success manager that then guides them through that, and our community experts that guide them through how to implement changes that hopefully do impact it in a better way. And so sometimes it's a trial and error thing, right? So overall, we have a default playbook, but some customer bases are just different, and some things work for a certain type of persona and customer base better for others. And so that's where there's also a piece of trial and error that comes with the dedicated success manager that is allocated from Turf.
You know what the best answer would have been?
What is
Like
it?
they go to our own community.
They do go to our own
community.
No, definitely.
Please. Yeah. Like community.uster.io.
Yeah.
Here
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is.
yeah, for
Boom.
sure.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. Yeah, that would be very a bit of like a very easy
No, for sure.
thing for you
It's
to say, like, okay,
yeah.
just go to our own.
No, that's true. It's just
No,
with
it's
enterprise
I'm
clients, they
kidding.
a
I'm
lot of the
kidding. Like
times
there's
expect, dedicated customer success manager. They expect
yeah,
bi-weekly
there's
strategy calls and whatnot. And that's also something that we in Sunstars
I know.
upsell. But yeah.
No, but it's I get it. Again, it depends on like the persona, the matching of the right personas, and this also comes into place. Like what type of customer is it, and what's their level of support? Like it's the like we do everything for you, we do it with you, or you do everything yourself, and then it's basically the matching there. So I was just kidding. Like
Yeah, no,
it's a smart process. So and
it's eat your own dog food, right?
okay.
So definitely.
Basically, yeah. Well, that was one of the questions that I had. Like, hey, if you are a community manager that is using Turf for their own internal, like, customer community, how do they then actually like go into the Turf community? Is there like a secret Turf community like button that's only shown to the company users,
Yeah, so
basically?
we have our own widget that
Yeah,
only shows to moderators and
yeah,
admins of communities that then also are member in our communities.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Awesome.
and they
That's
can access it from
I
the
like
website, by the way. Yeah,
yeah, that's all. Oh, yeah, I saw it on your
oh,
website, but I went there real quick. I'm like, yes, they have it. Like, awesome.
true.
Um, hey, like we're getting towards the end of our conversation here, Oliver. So
Yeah,
I really like it. Like, I think it's very smart that like it starts with like the impact and the goals. There are certain triggers that might want you to take a look at community as a solution. Basically, like the costs of support are going upwards, or you want to like basically make improvements there. Like there are certain things that are happening with your churn and retention numbers where the community might make sense for you to start implementing. It is something that is, I think, a very nice solution towards or like an addition or an alternative to the chat. The user perspective, I think people forget how important human to human connection is. And I think this is where a community can be very like strong if you're setting it up in the right way.
definitely.
And that basically means that you need to follow the launch guide to become more successful. And if you need any help with this, you should just talk to Oliver because he's done this
Yep.
for quite some time now and has gained the perspective now before they even got started with over 100 community managers. Thanks so much. If they want to come in contact with you, what's like the best way for people to like go to?
Everyone can always reach me on LinkedIn, and otherwise reach me at Olivier@userve.io. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anyone might have about communities, or even, my history as a founder and everything related to that. Also happy to just meet new people and learn from other people's experience. So I think Mike, this is a great way for me to also do that and come in contact hopefully with a lot of other interesting people. So I appreciate you having me on, and it was great. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm going to make sure that all the information is in the show notes so that people can easily contact you if they want to like up-level their community and make sure that it actually is effective.
Yeah, definitely.
And that they can also measure the impact. I think that is something that
That's one that
is
shouldn't be
very,
forgotten.
very important.
Yeah.
Well, and there's always two questions that I would like to end with. And they're a bit more personal questions. If you can go back in time to when you first started out with your entrepreneurial journey, what would you tell young Oliver to stop doing immediately, like ditch it? And what is one thing that you would tell yourself to keep on doing? So what should stay and what should go?
I would tell myself to let go of that long-term vision and long-term view a lot earlier than I have. What I experienced, obviously you should have a long-term goal and a long-term strategy. But I personally think once you have set that and it has become clear for you, let it go for now and focus on the small steps that are in front of you. That's how you're going to be able to enjoy this process a lot more. That's how you're going to be able to be a lot more in the moment, learn a lot more, and whatnot. And overall, I would say it would bring a lot more happiness because you are not constantly focused on not yet having achieved that long-term goal, right? And it is about setting a goal, but the destination really is the road towards the goal. And I think, that's something that I heard a lot when I started out. That's what you hear, in certain books or whatnot. It didn't really me until a certain point where I was like, that's the case. And no, I think learn to enjoy what you're doing on a daily basis and think about your long-term goal in certain scenarios. And you should obviously be aware of how current day-to-day stuff is affecting that long-term goal. But really enjoying and having that view of like, okay, what I'm doing now, that's what I want to do. And that's kind of like the destination is the journey. It's not that specific goal because, you're always going to have goals. Once you've reached it, you're going to have another goal. It's really cliche, I think, but for me, I had to really learn that maybe the hard way and really realize that, I think. So that would be my one two over maybe.
No. It's really funny because this is something that a lot of people have mentioned. It has to do with focus. It has to do with decision making. It has to do with the journey, not the destination. So thanks. I really appreciate that you shared this with us. So we're at the end right now. So for the people still listening, thank you so much. If you found this valuable and you think that you want to maybe get started with the community, please contact Oliver. I'm going to make sure that all the information is in the show notes. For now, Oliver, thank you so much for today. And for everybody else, until the next episode. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thanks.